Boy, I tell you, I'm still riding the fumes of this rock and roll record. I listened to it 3 times. I've forgotten about this record. Listened to it 3 times on YouTube just a few minutes ago. And at number 42, that fantasy playlist of August 29th, 1987, it is Paul Kelley and the Messenger, Darling, and the Messengers, Darling It Hurts at number 38, up 7 from 45. If I heard this song more often, and if I just heard it more often, I didn't hear it on the radio here. I probably saw the video night tracks, and I only probably played it only a few times. But if I heard it more often, I would have put this song in the top 10. This is a hard rock and roll record. It is a very melodic rock and roll record. Got thundering guitars, streaming keyboards, tasty keyboards, sort of reminiscent. Reminds me a little bit of those keyboards that Question Mark and the Mysterians song Can't Get Enough of You Baby, which was later remade by Smash Mouth and the 96 Tears back in 1966. And another one that reminded me of the Sir Douglas Quintet. The keyboards and that record reminded me of the Sir Douglas Quintet when they did The Rains Come or The Rains Came back in early 1966, and then Mendocino back in 1969. And ooh, boy, a little bit of nostalgic vibes coming off this record. And this is Bruce Springsteen. It is a regular good time rock and roll record. It is Bruce Springsteen, Tom Petty, even George Thorogood. Throw them on steroids. If you're into that rock and roll, it could be grunge. It even starts off a little bit grungy at the beginning of the record. Might make, say, a group like Stone Temple Pilots or Pearl Jam proud, and it just roars. The guitar solos roar in this record. You like those loud guitar solos, man, and it's very melodic, very rhythmic. It follows the paradigm of the melody. It makes it radio friendly. But unfortunately, it was not played on pop radio here in the. God, it should have been. Although it did well, it did okay on the alternative charts. They called it the mainstream rock charts. The Billboard mainstream chart, so went to number 19, so that's not bad. And it was from the album called Gossip. It was Paul Kelley and the Messengers' American debut. Paul Kelley from Australia, excuse me, always seem to lose my voice when I do these videos. It's just too much excitement. Holy shit going on, man, I tell you what. He's the 6th of 9 children. When he was young, he wrote poetry. He actually, early on, aspired to be a short story writer, but he picked up the guitar when he was very young. He moved to Melbourne in 1976. He joined an R&B outfit. It was called High Rise Bombers, but it was a big group. 3 songwriters in that group. So you can imagine that there were probably some ego issues embedded in that band. It fell apart. It didn't last for very long. And he formed another band. It was called Dot. Paul Messenger and the Dots. They got a deal with Mushroom Records, and they came out with a couple of albums. It was Talk and Manila. But Paul Kelley was a perfectionist. He was when he was in Melbourne, he had developed a reputation as a songwriter. And this was back when he was in the Dots, and Paul Kelley and the Dots. Other musicians in Melbourne, they came to see him play. He had generated a lot of momentum in Australia. If you're watching this video in Australia, it seems likely that you probably remember Paul Kelley. Boy, oh boy, there's a big write-up about him, and Wikipedia was surprised at the amount of information that was written about him or printed about him or digitally put out about him. But anyway, let's go. He put out these 2 albums with the Dots, but he was not happy with it. He was a perfectionist, and he split up the band. He split up the Dots, and he moved to Sydney, and he did a solo thing in Sydney. He put out an album he worked on an album. It was called Post, a solo album. He did it on a shoestring budget. Took him 2 weeks. And he was resigned. Well, apparently along the road, he left Mushroom Records because he was in, from what I understand, financial straits when he was going solo, working on this album Post. but he was resigned. He was resigned to Mushroom Records. Now, this is where this interesting story comes in. Now, keep in mind, two different sources. One source had this event happening a little bit earlier when he first got to deal with Mushroom Records. But another source has it when he tried to get back on Mushroom Records. Talking about Paul Kelley. Paul Kelley, his manager, suggested that he signed a deal instead with Register Records because the president of Mushroom Records, his name was Michael Gordinski. Apparently he is on the level, the equivalent of Clive Davis, a major record mogul in Australia who signed groups like the Split Enz that were huge in Australia. Kylie Minogue, huge all over the world except, unfortunately, here in the United States. But he signed them, and apparently, for some reason, he was either reluctant to resign or to sign up Paul Kelley or just didn't want to. But the public relations official, one of the public relations people with Mushroom Records, her name was Michelle Higgins. She is the heroine here. She's basically a hero here. She was a big fan of Paul Kelley. When she found out that he wasn't going to get signed back up with Mushroom Records, guess what she did? She locked herself up in a hotel room for a week. I am not going to leave this hotel room until you sign Paul Kelley. That's what she told the company. That's what she told, or the message got across to Gordinski. For a week. She stayed in that hotel room for a week. She was a major believer of Paul Kelley to do something like that. Well, he got signed back up. It was a 2-album deal with Mushroom Records when he got back on. The album is called, well, first off, he formed another band called Paul Kelley and the Colored Girls. The Colored Girls was referenced from that song by Lou Reed, the song that Lou Reed did back in 1973, Take a Walk on the Wild Side. And there's that part where the Colored Girls sing, doot, doot, doot. So they got it from that. But when they went on tour in America, they changed it to Paul Kelley and the Messengers because obvious the racial sensitivities. And they toured the United States by bus. They also toured with Crowded House, another Australian band that got really big here in the United States in 1987. And Gossip was a double album. It was a double album recorded at Trafalgar. I probably mispronounced the word. It's kind of like Trafalgar Square in London, but it's Trafalgar Studios in Australia. I believe it's in Sydney. They recorded that album there. It was really basically a 2-album set, but when it was released, the album was released by A&M Records here in the United States. The album was shortened to just, the double album was shortened to just 1 album, and there were 15 songs on it. But it was the album that brought Paul Kelley to the American audience. It finally happened for him back in 1987. So, oh boy, released in July 1987, the second single, either the first or second single off that album. This is one fine rock and roll record right here. I mean, if you're into, I tell you what, it's just rock and roll. I know a lot of this is attitude. Punk's got the attitude. The arena bands, the fan of the arena bands, they got an attitude, but it's all rock and roll. It's like Billy Joel sang. It's still rock and roll to me. I mean, if you're into Kiss, George Thorogood, it doesn't matter. Sex Pistols, Clash, Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, Rush, any of these rock bands, Bruce Springsteen, Tom Petty, this will be a great fit into your rock and roll collection. This record, this record, Darling, It Hurts by Paul Kelley and the Messengers at number 38 on my fantasy playlist of August 29th, 1987.